The basement door slammed shut behind her. Not an accident, not a mistake. Upstairs, Christmas music was playing. Guests were laughing, glasses were clinking. Downstairs, Naomi realized her phone was gone. The door was locked. And she was 8 months pregnant. Her husband told everyone she needed rest. But as the cold crept in, Naomi noticed something else. A blinking red light, a security camera, and hundreds of miles away, 3 men were about to see what her husband never thought anyone would find. Because this wasn't just a locked door. It was the moment everything in his life began to collapse. Before we continue, can I ask you a question? Where in the world are you watching from? Comment below because we'd love to know how far these stories travel. And don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button to get in fully. Because if stories like this pull you in, you're going to want more. Now, let's begin. The basement door slammed shut with a force that echoed through the concrete stairwell, and Naomi Pierce barely had time to steady herself before the lock turned from the outside. It was Christmas Eve. The sound of laughter drifted faintly through the vents above her head, warm and careless, clashing violently with the cold seeping through the stone floor beneath her bare feet. Naomi pressed her palm against her stomach instinctively, breathing through the shock as her balance wavered. 8 months pregnant. No coat, no phone, just the thin green dress Grant had insisted she wear because it looked festive. "Grant," she called once, not loudly, not desperately, but there was no answer. Upstairs, the music played out loudly. Glasses clinked and laughs were a little too loud. Naomi swallowed and turned slowly, taking in the narrow basement space. Exposed beams, storage shelves, a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. It wasn't unfinished exactly, but it wasn't meant for anyone to stay in, especially not someone carrying a child. She walked to the door and tried the handle anyway. Locked. Her breath fogged as she exhaled, and for a brief moment, her mind tried to reject what had just happened. This had to be some misunderstanding. A mistake. Grant wouldn't. No, he had. Minutes earlier, he had smiled at her in front of their guests, kissed her cheek, and whispered, "We'll talk later." This was later. Upstairs, Grant Holloway raised his glass, his voice smooth as he welcomed everyone to the Holloway estate. He looked every bit the composed host. Tailored jacket, relaxed smile, the image of a man who had everything under control. When someone asked where Naomi was, he didn't miss a beat. "She wasn't feeling well," he said lightly. "Pregnancy's been tiring her out." A few sympathetic nods. Someone murmured, understanding. The conversation moved on. Grant didn't look toward the basement door. He didn't need to. Back downstairs, Naomi leaned against the wall, steadying herself as another wave of cold crept up her spine. She focused on her breathing, counting slowly. Panic wouldn't help. Panic never helped. She had learned that over time, learned how to stay calm, how to make herself smaller when things turned sharp. But this wasn't an argument. This wasn't silence. This was something else. She looked up and froze. In the corner of the ceiling, partially hidden behind a beam, a small red light blinked. A security camera. Naomi stared at it, heart pounding. Grant had always been meticulous about surveillance. Motion sensors, smart locks, layers of security. It had once made her feel safe. Now she wondered who else could see. She took a step closer, squinting, trying to tell if the lens was pointed toward her or angled away. The red light blinked again. "Please," she whispered, barely audible, unsure whether she was speaking to the camera or to herself. "Please still work." Miles Pierce was halfway through wrapping a gift in his Manhattan apartment when his phone vibrated on the counter. He frowned, glancing at the screen. A security alert. That wasn't unusual, except this wasn't his system. It was tied to a secondary monitoring account he rarely thought about anymore. His sister's house. Miles straightened slowly, the paper slipping from his hands as he tapped the notification. The screen loaded, and his breath caught. Naomi stood in the frame, pale, visibly pregnant, wrapped in nothing but a thin dress, her hand pressed protectively to her stomach. The timestamp read December 24th. Live feed. "What the hell?" Miles muttered. He didn't hesitate. He hit the group call button. Adrian answered first, his voice sharp. "What is it?" Caleb joined seconds later, concern already evident. "Miles?" "I'm sharing my screen," Miles said, fingers moving fast. "Tell me you see this." There was silence. Then Adrian swore under his breath. Naomi shifted on the screen, her breath shallow, her eyes flicking toward the door again. She tried the handle once more, slower this time, as if hoping the lock might have magically changed its mind. Caleb's voice dropped. "Is that a basement?" "Yes," Miles said. "At Holloway's place." Adrian didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Call emergency services. Now." Miles nodded, already dialing. "I'm recording everything." The operator answered, and Miles spoke with controlled urgency, giving the address, explaining that his pregnant sister was locked inside a basement on Christmas Eve. He didn't embellish. He didn't speculate. He let the facts speak. Back in the basement, Naomi slid down the wall slowly, careful not to strain herself. She wrapped her arms around her knees, focusing on the rhythmic sound of her breathing. The cold had settled deep now, but she refused to let it show, not even to herself. Upstairs, the doorbell rang. Grant frowned slightly, irritation flickering across his face before he masked it with a polite smile. "Excuse me?" he said, setting his drink down. When he opened the door, the sight of uniformed officers and paramedics standing on the snow-dusted steps wiped the smile from his face completely. "Grant Holloway?" one of the officers asked. "Yes," Grant replied carefully. "Is there a problem?" "We received a call about a pregnant woman being confined inside your home." The room behind Grant went quiet. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Music faded. Grant's gaze flickered past the officers, calculating. There must be some mistake. "Sir," the paramedic said gently, "we need access to your basement." For the first time that night, Grant hesitated. Downstairs, Naomi heard footsteps above her. Voices, not Grant's alone. She closed her eyes, her hand tightening over her stomach, as relief washed through her. Not loud, not explosive, but steady and grounding. The door unlocked. Light spilled down the steps, and Naomi looked up as the door opened fully, revealing faces she didn't recognize at once, concern etched clearly across them. "You're safe now," someone said softly. Naomi didn't cry. She didn't speak. She stood, carefully, and walked toward the light. Naomi emerged from the basement wrapped in a thermal blanket, the sudden warmth almost overwhelming after the cold below. The paramedic stayed close, guiding her carefully up the steps and into the living room, where every conversation had stopped completely. Dozens of eyes turned toward her. Some guests looked confused, others looked shocked. A few looked away, suddenly very interested in the contents of their glasses. Christmas lights blinked softly along the staircase railing, cheerful and oblivious. Grant stood near the fireplace, his jaw tight, his expression caught somewhere between disbelief and irritation. For a split second, his eyes met Naomi's. She didn't look at him long. "Ma'am," the paramedic said quietly, "we're going to check you and the baby, all right?" Naomi nodded once. One of the officers turned toward Grant. "Sir, can you explain why your wife was locked in the basement?" Grant exhaled sharply, already slipping into the calm tone he used in boardrooms and negotiations. "This is being blown out of proportion. Naomi asked for some space. The door locks automatically." "That door locks from the outside," the officer replied. The room went even quieter. A woman near the kitchen counter covered her mouth. Someone else whispered, "Oh my God." Naomi felt the weight of the moment pressing in, but she kept her eyes on the paramedic, focusing on the steady instructions, the reassuring presence. She refused to shrink. Not now. Another officer stepped in. "We're going to need everyone to clear the room. This is now an active situation." Guests began gathering coats, murmuring to one another as they were escorted out. Phones came out despite the officer's warnings. Someone snapped a photo before being told firmly to put it away. Grant took a step toward Naomi. "This doesn't need to turn into a spectacle." Naomi finally looked at him then. Her voice was calm. "You made it one." Grant froze. The officers separated them gently but decisively, guiding Naomi toward the front door where the ambulance waited. Snowflakes drifted down lazily, landing in her dark hair as she was helped inside. Miles Pierce was already on his way to the airport when his phone rang again. "She's out," the paramedic on scene confirmed. "Vitals are stable. We're taking her in as a precaution." Miles closed his eyes briefly, relief flooding through him. "Thank you." Adrian's voice cut in on the group call. "I want copies of everything. Body cams, security feeds, all of it." Caleb added, "I'm contacting a judge, tonight." Back at the house, Grant sat rigidly on the edge of a chair as an officer asked him questions. He answered them carefully, choosing each word like it was a chess move. "I never intended to cause harm." "You locked her in a basement," the officer replied evenly. "It was a misunderstanding." The officer glanced at his notes. "We'll let the investigation determine that." Grant's phone buzzed. He checked it instinctively, then stopped himself. Too many eyes. Outside, flashing lights reflected off the snow, casting red and blue patterns across the immaculate front of the house. Neighbors peeked through curtains. Someone across the street filmed from behind a tree. The story was already moving faster than Grant could control. At the hospital, Naomi lay propped up on the bed as a nurse adjusted the monitor. The steady rhythm of the baby's heartbeat filled the room, grounding her in a way nothing else could. "You're doing great," the nurse said with a reassuring smile. "We'll keep you here for observation." Naomi nodded, her fingers resting lightly over her stomach. The door opened, and Adrian walked in first, tall and composed, his coat still dusted with snow. Caleb followed, then Miles, who crossed the room in 3 quick strides and wrapped her in a careful hug. "You scared us," Miles said quietly. Naomi rested her forehead briefly against his shoulder. "I'm okay." Adrian pulled up a chair, his expression controlled but intense. "We've got the footage." Naomi looked at him. "All of it?" "Enough," Caleb said. "More than enough." She didn't ask for details. She didn't need them. A doctor entered, delivering an update. No immediate complications. Stress levels elevated but manageable. Naomi listened, asked the necessary questions, stayed focused. When the doctor left, Adrian leaned forward. "We're filing for emergency protections tonight." Naomi met his gaze. "Good." Miles hesitated. "Do you want to press charges?" Naomi didn't answer immediately. She looked down at her hands, noticing the faint indentation where her wedding ring usually sat. She slid it off slowly and placed it on the table beside her bed. "I want him away from me," she said. "And from our child." Caleb nodded. "That's exactly what will happen." Across town, Grant sat alone in his study as the house finally fell silent. The party was over. The decorations felt mocking now. Lights still blinking, half-empty glasses abandoned on tables. His phone buzzed again. This time, he answered. "What the hell happened tonight?" a voice demanded on the other end. A business partner. "I'm seeing police reports." Grant pinched the bridge of his nose. "It's a private matter." "It's public now." Grant stared at the dark window, his reflection staring back at him, distorted by the glass. "It will settle." But even as he said it, he felt the ground shifting. His phone buzzed again and again. Emails, messages, notifications, piling up faster than he could read them. At the hospital, Naomi closed her eyes briefly, exhaustion catching up with her now that the adrenaline was fading. Miles adjusted the blanket around her shoulders. "You should rest," he said. She opened her eyes. "I will." Then quietly, "But I'm not going back there." Adrian's voice was firm. "You won't." Naomi exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing just slightly. For the first time that night, she allowed herself to believe it. By morning, the story had escaped the walls of the Holloway estate. Grant woke to his phone vibrating non-stop on the nightstand. Messages stacked over one another, notifications blinking so fast they blurred together. He ignored them for several seconds, staring at the ceiling, replaying the night in his head. Not the moment Naomi walked out of the basement, but the exact second the officers stepped inside his house. That was when control slipped from his fingers. He reached for the phone. The first headline hit harder than he expected. "Police respond to Christmas Eve incident at luxury Utah estate." Grant scoffed. Incident. That word still left room to maneuver. He scrolled. Anonymous sources. Guest accounts. A blurry photo of emergency lights reflecting off snow. No names yet, but that wouldn't last. Down the hall, the house felt cavernous and unfamiliar. Decorations still glittered, mocking him with cheer that no longer belonged. He moved through the kitchen, poured coffee he didn't want, and opened his laptop. 6 unread emails from investors, 3 from the board. Grant exhaled slowly and began drafting responses, choosing neutral language, minimizing, reframing. He had done this 1,000 times before. This was just another problem to manage. Except it wasn't. At the hospital, Naomi sat upright in bed, scrolling through her own phone for the first time since the night before. She didn't search for Grant. She didn't search for herself. She read messages from people she hadn't heard from in months. Friends who had drifted away. Colleagues who had sensed something off but never said it out loud. "You okay?" Miles asked from the chair beside her. Naomi nodded. "I feel clear." Adrian entered quietly, his expression unreadable. "We have confirmation. Emergency protection is in place. He's not allowed to contact you." Naomi's shoulders relaxed, just a fraction. Caleb leaned against the doorframe. "And there's more." Naomi looked at him. "How much more?" Caleb exchanged a glance with Adrian. "The footage didn't start last night." Miles pulled his phone out, hesitating. We didn't realize how extensive it was. Naomi sat very still. Show me. Miles turned the screen towards her. Short clips, time-stamped, hallways, locked doors. Moments that meant nothing on their own, but together formed a pattern Naomi recognized instantly. Her throat tightened, not in surprise, but in confirmation. I thought I was imagining it, she said quietly. The timing, the way things always seem to close in. Adrian's voice was calm. You weren't. Naomi handed the phone back. I don't need to see any more. That decision, what she chose not to watch, felt just as powerful as everything she had already done. Across town, Grant sat through a board call that lasted less than 10 minutes. We're suspending your role pending review, the chairman said flatly. This is premature, Grant replied. There's no charge. There's footage, another voice cut in. And optics. Optics. Grant clenched his jaw. This company can't afford uncertainty, the chairman continued. We'll be in touch. The line went dead. Grant stared at the screen, then slammed his laptop shut. His phone buzzed again. This time, he didn't bother answering. Instead, he opened his contacts and scrolled until he found Naomi's name. Blocked. His jaw tightened. He tried again. Same result. Grant stood, pacing the room, frustration building. She was overreacting. She always did when things got emotional. Once she calmed down, she'd see reason. She needed stability. He provided that. He paused. The house felt too quiet. Grant grabbed his coat and keys, heading for the door, only to find a folded document taped neatly to the inside of the frame. He unfolded it. Emergency restraining order. For the first time since the night before, Grant felt something close to panic. At the hospital, Naomi signed discharge papers slowly, carefully. Adrian stood nearby, handling logistics, while Miles stepped out to take a call. Caleb leaned in. There's something you should decide. Naomi looked up. What? Where you want to go, Caleb said, because once this becomes fully public, nowhere will feel neutral. Naomi considered this. She didn't hesitate long. I want to be somewhere quiet, somewhere that isn't his. Adrian nodded. Already arranged. Miles returned, phone still in hand. News outlets are calling. We're not responding yet. Naomi stood, steady on her feet, and adjusted her coat. They can wait. As they walked through the hospital corridor, a television mounted on the wall caught Naomi's eye. A news anchor spoke in measured tones. Sources confirm that an investigation is underway following a Christmas Eve incident involving prominent developer Grant Holloway. Naomi didn't stop walking. Grant sat alone in his car, outside the house, gripping the steering wheel, as the same news segment played on the dashboard screen. His name, spoken aloud, stripped of context, flattened into sound bites. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was his attorney. Grant, the voice said carefully, you need to stop trying to contact her. I haven't, Grant snapped. I know, the attorney replied, but you need to understand. This is no longer a private matter. Every move you make from here on out matters. Grant laughed bitterly. So what? I'm just supposed to sit here? Yes, the attorney said. For now. Grant ended the call and slammed his fist against the steering wheel. At a quiet property miles away, Naomi stepped into a sunlit room with large windows overlooking snow-covered trees. The air smelled clean. Still. Miles set her bag down gently. You can stay as long as you need. Naomi walked to the window, resting her hand on the glass. For the first time in months, she felt like the space around her wasn't closing in. Her phone buzzed, a message notification from an unknown number. She didn't open it. She turned the phone face down. Adrian watched her closely. "You don't owe anyone explanations." Naomi nodded. "I know." Outside, snow continued to fall softly, covering footprints, smoothing edges. Inside, the balance of power had already shifted. If you're still watching, then you need stay with us, because the payback is just about to get started. So, if you haven't subscribed yet, we'd love for you to join our community by hitting the subscribe button. Every story we will share is a spark of hope, giving a voice, a future, and a chance to everyone out there that have faced challenges, one way or the other, over the world. So support us by subscribing and turning on the notification bell, so you never miss a story that truly matters. And we will want to hear from you, so drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from and how the story touched you. Together, we are not just watching stories unfold, we are keeping hope of a better tomorrow. The next 48 hours moved faster than Naomi expected, not because she was rushing, but because everything else was. Her phone stayed mostly silent by design. Caleb had changed the number, filtered contacts, shut down anything that could reach her without intention. What noise did reach her came secondhand, updates from her brothers delivered calmly, deliberately, as if they were briefing her on weather patterns instead of the unraveling of her marriage. Grant's name was everywhere. A major business outlet published a carefully worded piece about internal concerns at Holloway Developments. Another followed, citing unnamed sources close to the board. None of them mentioned the basement. Not yet. They didn't need to. The implication alone was enough to rattle investors. Naomi sat at the kitchen island of the guest house, hands wrapped around a mug of tea she barely drank. She listened, nodded, asked questions when they mattered. "What happens next?" she asked. Caleb answered without hesitation. "Next, we take control of the timeline." Miles leaned against the counter. Grant is still assuming this will burn out, that people will get bored. Naomi looked up. "They won't." Adrian met her eyes. "No, they won't." Grant found out just how wrong he was when his access badge failed at the office entrance. He tried again, frowning. The red light blinked. "Sir," the security guard said carefully, "I've been instructed to escort you to the conference room." Grant straightened his jacket, irritation flickering across his face. "By whom?" "The board." The room was already full when Grant walked in. Familiar faces avoided his gaze. Someone slid a folder across the table toward him. "We're initiating a full review," the chairman said, effective immediately. Grant didn't sit. "On what grounds?" "Risk," the chairman replied. "Reputation, liability." Grant laughed once, sharply. "You're reacting to headlines." "We're reacting to evidence," another board member said. "And more is coming." Grant's eyes narrowed. "From who?" The answer came an hour later, when his attorney called again. "They've requested full access to the security archive," the attorney said. "And Grant, they already have copies." Grant felt something twist in his chest. "From where?" There was a pause. "Your wife's family." Grant hung up without responding. At the guest house, Naomi stood in front of a mirror, smoothing her sweater over her stomach. She looked different to herself. Not physically, but in the way she held her shoulders, the way her gaze didn't flicker away from her own reflection. Miles watched from the doorway. "You don't have to do anything today." "I know," Naomi said, "but I want to." She picked up her phone and typed a single message, sending it to a secure email address Caleb had set up for her. To whom it may concern, I am safe. I'm focusing on my health and my child. I will not be making public statements at this time. That was it. No accusations, no details. The message was picked up by multiple outlets within the hour. Comment sections exploded. Support poured in faster than Naomi could read it. Strangers thanked her for her courage. Others speculated wildly, inventing details she refused to correct. Naomi didn't engage. She didn't need to. Grant sat alone in his office, the once impressive view now feeling like a cage. His phone buzzed again, this time not with news, but with silence. People who used to answer immediately were suddenly unavailable. Meetings were postponed. Calls went unanswered. He opened his email and found a message marked urgent. Subject: Temporary Asset Review. Grant leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. At the guest house, Naomi rested on the couch as Adrian spoke quietly on the phone in the next room. She could hear enough to understand the tone: measured, controlled, decisive. When he finished, he joined her. The judge approved the extended order. Naomi closed her eyes briefly. Good. Adrian hesitated. There's one more thing. She looked at him. What? They want your statement. Not today, but soon. Naomi considered this. She wasn't afraid of speaking. She just didn't want to waste words. When the time comes, she said, I'll tell the truth. Nothing more. That night, Grant tried one last time to reach her. He stood outside the guest house gate, his car idling, his phone pressed to his ear, as it rang and rang. The call went unanswered. He lowered the phone slowly, staring at the darkened windows beyond the gate. For the first time, it occurred to him that he might never be able to step inside her life again. Naomi watched from inside, unseen, as headlights lingered at the edge of the property before finally turning away. She didn't feel triumph. She felt clarity. She placed her hand over her stomach and whispered softly, "We're okay." And for the first time since Christmas Eve, she truly believed it. Grant's world didn't collapse all at once. It narrowed. Each hour brought another door quietly closing, another conversation that never happened, another meeting that was rescheduled indefinitely. By the third day after Christmas, his calendar, once packed weeks in advance, was nearly empty. He sat in his office long after sunset, lights dimmed, scrolling through emails he had already read twice. Legal language, corporate distance, carefully constructed phrases that said nothing and meant everything. "We'll circle back. We're reviewing the situation. This isn't the right time." Grant tossed the phone onto the desk and stood, pacing. He told himself this was temporary. Optics would shift. Something louder would replace him in the news cycle. It always did. But the silence felt deliberate. Across the city, Naomi sat at the dining table with her brothers, a stack of documents neatly arranged in front of her. She didn't touch them yet. She wanted to understand before she signed anything. Caleb slid one page closer. "This is procedural. Temporary separation of assets." "And this?" Naomi asked, tapping another. "Protection," Adrian said. "For you and the baby." Naomi nodded slowly. "I don't want to be reckless." Miles gave a faint smile. "You're being precise. That's not the same thing." Naomi exhaled, then picked up the pen. Each signature felt strangely grounding. Final, but not heavy. Grant's attorney called again that night. You need to prepare for the possibility that this becomes public testimony, the attorney said. If charges move forward, they won't, Grant interrupted sharply. They might, the attorney replied calmly. And if they do, your response matters. Grant laughed humorlessly. My response to what? A misunderstanding? The attorney paused. Grant, they have footage, patterns, timestamps. Grant ended the call without another word. He stared out the window, watching the city lights blur together. For the first time in his career, he couldn't find a move that put him ahead. At the guest house, Naomi stood in the kitchen as Miles adjusted the thermostat. Are you warm enough? He asked. Yes, she replied. I was thinking. That's usually dangerous, Miles said lightly. Naomi smiled faintly. I want to talk to the mediator. Adrian looked up. Already scheduled. Naomi met his gaze. I don't want this to turn into noise. I want it clean. Caleb nodded. That actually works in your favor. Later that night, Naomi sat alone, scrolling through messages she had saved but never sent. Old drafts, apologies, explanations, versions of herself that believed if she just explained better, things would change. She deleted them all. Her phone buzzed with a new message. Unknown number. You don't have to do this. Naomi stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she typed back. Naomi, I already did. She blocked the number and set the phone aside. Grant received the notification seconds later. Message undelivered. He slammed the phone down, anger flaring hot and sharp. He stood abruptly, knocking his chair over, the sound echoing too loudly in the empty room. This is insane, he muttered to himself. She's overreacting. But even as he said it, the words rang hollow. The mediator meeting took place 2 days later, via secure video. Naomi sat at the table, posture straight, expression neutral. Grant appeared on the screen from his office, his image crisp, his jaw tight. Thank you both for attending, the mediator began. Our goal is to establish temporary arrangements while matters are reviewed. Grant leaned forward. This entire situation is unnecessary. Naomi spoke calmly. I disagree. The mediator glanced. Between them. Mrs. Holloway, Naomi corrected gently. Pierce. Grant stiffened. I'm requesting full separation, Naomi continued, and sole decision-making authority for medical and personal matters. Grant scoffed. You're making this adversarial. Naomi met his gaze through the screen. You did that when you locked the door. Silence followed. The mediator cleared his throat. Let's proceed. After the call ended, Naomi sat quietly for a moment, then closed the laptop. Miles watched her closely. You okay? She nodded. I feel lighter. Grant slammed his laptop shut on his end, his face flushing with anger. He stood and paced, running a hand through his hair. She had looked at him differently. Not afraid, not pleading, detached. That scared him more than anything else. The following morning, the final blow came quietly. Grant arrived at the office to find a single envelope waiting on his desk. Inside was a letter from the board. Effective immediately, his role was terminated pending ongoing investigations. Grant stared at the page, reading it twice, then a third time. The words didn't change. He sank into the chair slowly, the weight of it pressing down on him. At the guest house, Naomi received a message from Adrian. It's done. She closed her eyes briefly, absorbing the moment. No rush of joy, no thrill, just certainty. That evening, she stood on the porch, wrapped in a soft blanket, watching the sky darken. Snow fell gently, settling on the railing. Her phone buzzed again, this time from Miles. Hey, he said. When this story ends, stick around. We're building something new. Naomi smiled softly. I already am. Grant didn't sleep that night. He lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations that no longer existed. Every version of the future he had planned, carefully, methodically, had slipped just out of reach. The worst part wasn't the loss of status or money. It was the loss of leverage. By morning, he had convinced himself of one thing. Naomi was being influenced. He told himself her brothers were orchestrating everything, that they were feeding her fear, manipulating her decisions, turning a private disagreement into a public execution. That story made sense. It allowed him to stay intact. So he did the one thing his attorney explicitly told him not to do. He went public. Grant sat in front of a camera in a neutral studio, dressed conservatively, his expression carefully composed. The interviewer asked soft questions. Grant gave measured answers. This has been an incredibly painful misunderstanding, Grant said, his voice calm. Naomi and I were under stress. Pregnancy is difficult. Emotions were high. He paused, as if choosing compassion over defensiveness. I would never intentionally harm my wife or child. The clip went live within the hour. At the guest house, Miles watched it on mute, jaw tight. He really thinks this will work, he muttered. Naomi sat beside him, listening to Grant's voice without looking at the screen. She recognized the cadence immediately, the tone he used when he wanted to sound reasonable, when he wanted people to doubt their own instincts. She reached for the remote and turned the volume down completely. No response, she said. Adrian nodded. That's the right call. Caleb checked his phone. Actually, not entirely. Naomi looked at him. What do you mean? They've requested clarification, Caleb said. From you. Naomi leaned back slightly. And I think you should give it. The room went quiet. Miles frowned. Are you sure? Naomi didn't answer immediately. She looked out the window, watching snow drift past the glass. Then she spoke, her voice steady. I won't defend myself, she said, but I won't let him rewrite this. That afternoon, Naomi recorded a statement. No studio, no interviewer, just her, seated near a window, natural light framing her face. She wore a simple sweater, her hair pulled back. No makeup beyond what made her comfortable. She didn't rehearse. My name is Naomi Pierce, she began. I'm currently 8 months pregnant. On Christmas Eve, I was locked inside a basement at my home. She paused, letting the sentence stand on its own. I'm safe now. I'm focusing on my health and my child. I won't be discussing private details, but I want to be clear about one thing. Her gaze was direct. What happened was not a misunderstanding. She ended the video there. No accusations, no emotion, no escalation. The internet did the rest. Grant watched the clip alone in his office, his knuckles whitening as it replayed. Comments poured in beneath it faster than he could scroll. Support for Naomi. Questions he couldn't answer. Anger he couldn't control. His phone buzzed. Attorney, we need to talk. Immediately. Grant didn't respond. Instead, he stood and walked to the window, staring down at the street below. People moved freely, unaware of the war unfolding behind closed doors. For the first time, Grant felt truly cornered. At the guest house, Naomi turned her phone face down after posting the video. Miles exhaled slowly. That was effective. Naomi nodded. I didn't say anything new. You didn't need to, Adrian said. You anchored the truth. That night, Naomi couldn't sleep. She lay awake, hand resting over her stomach. feeling the slow, steady movements of her child. She thought about the future, not in sweeping terms, but in small, tangible moments. Mornings, silence, choice. Her phone buzzed softly. Caleb. There's movement on the legal side. Charges are being considered. Naomi stared at the message for a long moment. Then she replied, Naomi. Proceed. Grant received the notice the following morning. He sat across from his attorney, listening as the words fell into place, each one sealing another door. Unlawful confinement, the attorney said carefully, among other considerations. Grant leaned back, rubbing his temples. This is ridiculous. It's serious, the attorney replied, and it's moving quickly. Grant laughed once, hollow. She won't even talk to me. The attorney met his gaze. That's the point. Grant's phone buzzed again. Another alert, another article, another analysis of Naomi's statement. He turned it off, shoving it into his pocket. For the first time, the narrative wasn't his to control. At the guest house, Naomi sat at the dining table, signing the last of the documents Caleb slid toward her. Each page felt like a step forward. When she finished, she set the pen down and leaned back. It's done, Caleb said. Naomi nodded, a quiet sense of finality settling in her chest. Miles smiled softly. You okay? She looked around the room, at her brothers, at the calm, at the absence of tension she had once mistaken for normal. Yes, she said, I really am. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the ground evenly, erasing old tracks. Inside, Naomi had already moved on. Grant's name no longer opened doors. It closed them. By the end of the week, the articles had shifted tone. No longer cautious, no longer speculative. Phrases like sources, confirm, and documents reviewed replaced alleged and reportedly. The footage itself was never released, but its existence was enough. People trusted what they couldn't see more than what they could. Grant sat in his apartment, smaller than his house, quieter, stripped of everything that once reinforced who he believed himself to be. His phone lay face down on the table, deliberately ignored. Every notification felt like another reminder that the world had moved on without asking his permission. He tried calling an old friend, straight to voicemail. Another. No answer. He opened his laptop, scrolling through social media, with a mix of disbelief and anger. Naomi's video had been shared thousands of times. Comment sections were flooded with support, analysis, personal stories that echoed her calm certainty. She hadn't shouted, she hadn't begged, she had simply spoken. Grant slammed the laptop shut and stood, pacing the room. This isn't over, he muttered. This isn't over. But the words lacked conviction. At the guest house, Naomi sat at the breakfast table, sunlight streaming in through the windows. She moved slowly now, deliberately, listening to her body in a way she hadn't allowed herself to before. Miles poured coffee. You've got another message request. Naomi didn't look up. Delete it. Adrian smiled faintly. You're getting good at that. Naomi met his gaze. I'm done negotiating my safety. Later that afternoon, she met with her doctor again. Routine checks, calm reassurances, a plan laid out clearly for the coming weeks. Stress levels are improving, the doctor said. That matters. Naomi nodded. I can feel it. As she left the office, she noticed a woman in the waiting room watching her with quiet recognition. The woman smiled, hesitant but warm. Thank you, she said softly as Naomi passed. Naomi paused. For what? For not explaining, the woman replied. It helped. Naomi smiled back, understanding more than words could capture. Across town, Grant sat through another meeting with his attorney, the room heavy with tension. "The court date has been scheduled," the attorney said. "Preliminary hearing." Grant leaned forward. "This is still excessive." The attorney didn't argue. "What matters now is your behavior." Grant scoffed. "So I just disappear?" "For now," the attorney said. "Yes." Grant left the meeting and drove aimlessly, the city blurring past him. Every street felt unfamiliar. Every reflection in shop windows looked like a stranger. He pulled over at a red light, his phone buzzing again. This time, it was a message from his publicist. "Publicist, we're stepping back, effective immediately." Grant stared at the screen until the light turned green again. At the guest house, Naomi sat on the couch with a notebook resting on her lap. She wasn't journaling. She was planning. Small things. Practical things. Lists that belonged entirely to her. Miles glanced at the page. "You're really doing this?" Naomi nodded. "I should have done it sooner." "No," Adrian said gently. "You did it when you were ready." That evening, Naomi recorded another short message. Not public, not for the media. This one was private, stored securely, intended for the future. She spoke calmly, one hand resting on her stomach. "If you ever wonder why we left," she said softly, "it's because safety should never feel like a favor." She saved the file and closed the laptop. Grant spent that night staring at the ceiling again, the silence pressing in. For the first time, there was no one to interrupt his thoughts, no meeting to escape into, no version of himself left to perform. He thought about the basement door, about the sound it made when it closed. He pushed the thought away, but it came back. At dawn, Naomi stepped outside, breathing in the cold air, feeling grounded. Snow crunched beneath her boots as she walked slowly along the path, Miles keeping a respectful distance behind her. "You know," Miles said, "people are subscribing to channels talking about this story." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "I don't want to be content." "You're not," he said. "You're context." Naomi smiled faintly. That night, as she prepared for bed, her phone buzzed one last time. "Unknown number." "I just want to explain." Naomi stared at the screen, then turned the phone off completely. Some stories didn't need explanations. They needed endings. The preliminary hearing took place on a gray morning, the kind that made the city feel muted and distant. Grant arrived early, sitting rigidly beside his attorney, his hands folded so tightly, his knuckles ached. He kept his eyes forward, refusing to look at the people filling the room behind him. Across the aisle, Naomi entered quietly with her brothers. She didn't look at Grant. She took her seat, one hand resting over her stomach, her posture steady. No nerves showed on her face. If anything, she looked relieved, like someone finally standing on solid ground after months of instability. Grant noticed the difference immediately. The judge entered. Proceedings began. Words like evidence, documentation, and reviewed footage filled the air. Grant listened, his jaw tightening with each passing minute, as the narrative formed without his input. When Naomi was asked to speak, she stood slowly. Her voice didn't waver. "I am here because I want safety," she said simply. "Not punishment, not attention. Safety." The room was silent. Grant swallowed hard. The judge nodded, scribbling notes. "Thank you." It was over faster than Grant expected. Outside the courtroom, cameras waited. Microphones were raised. Naomi paused briefly at the steps, sunlight breaking through the clouds above. A reporter called out, "Do you have anything to say?" Naomi stopped. "Yes," she said calmly. "Take care of yourselves, and believe people when they tell you the truth the first time." That was all. She turned and walked away. Grant remained inside longer, his attorney speaking in hushed tones. When he finally stepped out through a side exit, there were no cameras waiting, no questions, just silence. At the guest house later that evening, Naomi sat on the couch, feet elevated, a warm blanket pulled over her legs. The day's wait settled slowly, not crushing, just real. Miles handed her a glass of water. "You handled that perfectly." Naomi smiled faintly. "I just told the truth." Adrian leaned against the wall. "That's usually enough." Caleb checked his phone. "The judge granted everything we requested." Naomi closed her eyes briefly, letting the words sink in. For the first time since Christmas Eve, her chest felt light. She didn't celebrate. She didn't cry. She rested. Grant returned to his apartment to find the lights off and the rooms echoing. The place felt temporary now, like a waiting room he'd been stuck in too long. He dropped his keys on the counter and sat down heavily, staring at nothing. His phone buzzed. One message from an old colleague. "I hope you figure things out." Grant didn't reply. He leaned back, closing his eyes, and for the first time allowed himself to admit the truth he had avoided since that night. He had underestimated her. At the guest house, Naomi slept deeply for the first time in weeks. No dreams, no tension in her shoulders, just quiet. Morning arrived gently. Sunlight filtered through the curtains as Naomi woke, stretching slowly, listening to the steady rhythm of the house around her. She smiled to herself, then reached for her phone. Messages from strangers filled her inbox. Not demands, not questions, but gratitude. Short notes, long stories, people sharing moments they had never spoken aloud. Naomi didn't respond to all of them. She didn't need to. She typed one simple post instead and shared it quietly. "Thank you for being here. Take care of yourselves and each other." That was it. Miles glanced over her shoulder. "You know people are going to keep following this." Naomi nodded. "I know. And you're okay with that?" She considered the question, then answered honestly. "As long as I stay myself." Later that day, Naomi and her brothers sat outside, bundled against the cold, sipping warm drinks as snow continued to fall lightly around them. "What happens next?" Miles asked. Naomi looked out at the trees, their branches dusted white. "Next, I focus on my child. And the life I'm building?" Adrian smiled. "That's a good plan." In a quiet apartment across town, Grant packed a box with the last of his things. Awards, framed photos, mementos that suddenly felt hollow. He paused over a picture of Naomi from years ago, smiling, unaware. He set it face down in the box. Outside, life went on without him. Back at the guest house, Naomi stood at the window again, watching the snow fall, her reflection calm and steady. She placed a hand over her stomach and whispered softly, "We're free." And this time, she knew it was true. Weeks passed quietly after the hearing, the kind of quiet that felt earned rather than imposed. Naomi settled into a rhythm that belonged entirely to her. Mornings began slowly, without alarms or tension. She listened to her body now, adjusting her pace, letting rest be part of the plan instead of something she had to justify. The world outside continued to talk. Articles were written, opinions formed. News stories replaced hers in the endless churn of attention. Naomi let it all happen without chasing it or resisting it. She had said what needed to be said, One afternoon, as snow melted into thin streams along the driveway, Naomi sat at the kitchen table sorting through mail. Most of it was ordinary. Medical reminders, legal confirmations, a few notes forwarded from people she trusted. Then she paused at an envelope with familiar handwriting. She knew what it was before opening it. Inside was a single page. No apology, no excuses, just a short note from Grant. I see now that I was wrong. I hope one day you can forgive me. Naomi read it once. Then she folded the page neatly and placed it back in the envelope. She didn't tear it up. She didn't keep it either. She set it aside and stood, carrying it to the recycling bin near the door. The paper disappeared with a soft sound, final and unremarkable. Forgiveness, she had learned, didn't always require acknowledgement. Sometimes it just required distance. That evening, Naomi sat on the couch with her brothers, a familiar comfort settling over the room. A soft lamp glowed nearby, and outside, the last traces of snow reflected moonlight faintly. Miles leaned back, stretching. You know, people keep asking what you're going to do next. Naomi smiled. People always ask that. And, Adrian prompted, and I don't owe them an answer, she said gently. I owe myself one. Caleb nodded. Fair enough. Later that night, Naomi prepared a small bag by the door. Hospital essentials, comfortable clothes, items chosen carefully, intentionally. She paused before zipping it up, resting her hand on the fabric. Her phone buzzed with a notification from a private account she had created quietly days earlier. It wasn't public. It wasn't promotional. Just a space she controlled. A message waited. You helped me leave. Naomi stared at the words for a long moment, emotion rising slowly but steadily. She typed back. I'm glad you're safe. She set the phone down and breathed out. The next morning, Naomi stood in front of the mirror, studying her reflection. She looked older somehow, not in years, but in certainty. The woman staring back at her didn't flinch, didn't second guess. She nodded to herself. At the hospital, the room was calm, filled with soft light and quiet anticipation. Naomi lay back as the nurse adjusted the monitor, the familiar rhythmic sound filling the space. You ready? The nurse asked kindly. Naomi smiled. I am. Miles waited outside, pacing slightly, while Adrian and Caleb sat nearby, their expressions calm but alert. Time moved strangely then, slow and fast all at once. When the door finally opened, the nurse smiled. She's perfect, she said. Naomi held her daughter moments later, tears finally slipping free, not from fear or relief, but from something gentler, something whole. She looked down at the tiny face, the soft breaths, the future waiting quietly between heartbeats. I promise, Naomi whispered, you'll never have to earn your safety. Outside the room, her brothers stood together, listening to the sounds within, sharing a look that needed no words. Life continued. Grant, somewhere across the city, learned to exist without control. His name faded from headlines. His influence narrowed to the limits of his own choices. He moved through days that no longer bent around him. And Naomi? Naomi built something new. Not loudly, not for show, but with intention. Months later, on a quiet evening, Naomi sat near a window with her daughter asleep against her chest. The world outside glowed softly, ordinary and beautiful. She picked up her phone and typed one final message on her private page. If you're still here, thank you for staying with this story. If something in it felt familiar, know this: your safety matters. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, take a moment to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe, because every voice that stays makes the next story possible. She set the phone aside and looked down at her child. The door behind her remained open, and this time it always would.